So, you want to work in a zoo? Well, you're in the right place. We're going to be talking to zookeepers, researchers, conservationists and many more people about their careers. We will discuss how they got into doing what they do now, and of course we'll be asking them for their advice to those that aspire to work with animals or for animals and the natural world. So, what are we talking about today, Jo?
Well, at its heart, the Wild Planet Trust is a conservation organisation. So for our visitors, what they see on site is obviously the animals and plants that we care for here at Paignton and Newquay. Mm-hmm. But just as important is the conservation work we are doing, what we call in situ. So that basically means in the wild, with the species and habitats that are out there. So today we're going to be talking to two people who are directly involved with that, responsible for coordinating all the projects that we support. They are incredibly busy people with crazy schedules. So we are actually going to be talking to them individually this time.
Okay, so who is it that we're going to be talking to first then?
So first we've got Andy. So he's worked for the Trust for quite a few years now in various different roles. But he now heads up our Conservation Project Partnerships. It's a very fancy sounding job title. But he works mainly with our overseas projects. So I'll let him explain what his fancy sounding job title actually involves in his own words.
Excellent. So let's hear from our discussion with Andy then. We are joined by Andy. So Andy, who are you and what do you do for Wild Planet Trust?
My name's Andy Bowkett. I'm the Conservation Planning and Partnerships Manager. Which is quite a lot of words. Mm-hmm. I've got kind of two roles really. One is the planning aspect, which is mainly to support the Chief Science Officer, so my boss, in terms of developing policy and strategy for the Trust going forward. And the other one, the partnerships aspect, is I focus on the overseas conservation projects. Mm-hmm. So that's our partnerships overseas, where we send funding and work together to save species or halt species decline in the wild.
Excellent stuff. And obviously we'll get into what some of those projects are and what those partnerships are as we go through the podcast. I'm sure Jo's got plenty of questions about that.
Yep.
But my next question for you, Andy, is what is the strangest job you've ever had?
Yeah, I've done loads of jobs, but because I've done quite a lot of kind of work through temping agencies where they just shove you in anywhere and you've got no idea what you're doing. So it's probably not that strange, but I did do. I worked at the Totnes milk bottling factory for a while, which was shift work, like 12-hour shifts, like overnight, and that had a certain weird quality to it.
What did you actually do in the milk?
Well, mainly because you're like an agency staff and they can't trust you to do anything that requires any skill or knowledge. It was mainly filling trucks full of milk containers. I did once work in the bit where the actual empty milk bottles, so this is going way back, came in to be cleaned, and we had to line them up and they all got bottle brushed.
Oh wow, okay.
How clean do they actually get them? This is just personal
They got them very clean, but they came in a right state. Quite often, I remember there's lots of slugs in them.
Oh, no.
And I remember the guy saying to me, "If there's any money in there, you keep it." Okay.
Why would there be money in a milk bottle?
I think because people used to sometimes put money in the milk bottles that they returned, the empties, to tip the milkman.
I never tip my milkman like that.
Well,
I also never clean my milk bottles thoroughly because I figured that they do get a good clean, and now I know
clean.
that.
Oh, there you go, now you know.
But sadly the milk factory is now closed.
Oh, that's a shame.
Okay, right, I suppose we should get off milk bottling and actually talk about
into what you do now.
Role. So I suppose we'll always start with a bit about how you actually got where you are today, because I think you're probably a fairly similar path to me, really, in that you were a student way back when.
I was, yeah. So, that was very much the foot in the door. I did zoology undergraduate degree at Cardiff University, and as part of that we had the opportunity of doing a year in industry, a placement year, and I came here to Paignton Zoo and was part of the research team watching monkeys and designing environmental enrichment for them. But even at that point, what I really wanted to do was to work in the field. So I wanted to work with threatened wildlife.
Yeah.
Kind of at the kind of with the conservation angle, really. And after I finished my degree, I got the opportunity to go out to Zimbabwe, which was a project connected to Paignton Zoo and Wild Planet Trust, and which we still support, actually, the Dambari Wildlife Trust in Zimbabwe. And that was a kind of semi-voluntary post. I mean, I had flights paid for, but it was basically a voluntary role. And that was my first experience of going to Africa, of working in the field, of working with people from a different culture and country. And things went from there, really.
Oh, amazing.
When did you end up back here then?
Yeah, so actually after the Zimbabwe, so I stayed a year and a half in Zimbabwe. And that was also when I first worked with duikers, which are little antelope.
Okay.
Which became a bit of a theme for me professionally and academically. So duikers are a small African antelope that kind of hide in the bushes. So you don't think of gazelles in big herds. These are like little things that creep around, and no one knows very much about them. So we were radio tracking some in Zimbabwe, and that became a big interest for me. But actually, after Zimbabwe, I had a kind of break from working with projects connected with the Wild Planet Trust.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Mauritius.
Very
Worked on the
nice.
pink pigeon project.
Okay.
Although actually we do have
was
links.
gonna say,
We
we're-
do have
we're
links to that
linked.
project. Yeah. I know some of our bird keepers have been out several times to
Yeah.
help with that. Again, that was a kind of voluntary position, but it was working with really severely threatened species. So even though I'd got that kind of field experience from the duikers, I wanted to work on a really kind of proactive conservation project, hands-on. So I did that for a year, and then shortly after that, I actually came back to Paignton. I kind of emailed and said, if I came back and volunteered for a bit, would you help me find a PhD and carry on with my academic studies? And the trust agreed to that. So particularly because I was very interested to work on duikers again.
Yeah.
But this time on the more endangered species, which are either in West Africa or East Africa. So we went for East Africa, and the PhD was in Tanzania.
Oh, amazing.
Why do you like duikers so much?
I mean,
They're not the most charismatic of
they're not.
things.
No, they're not. People. I mean, you kind of you grow very attached to your study subjects, don't you? So whatever it is, probably if I'd have studied woodlice or something, I'd also be into woodlice. But duikers are. I mean, they are very attractive animals. But I mean, the main thing is the fact that they're ignored by most people that haven't heard of them. There's very few that are in zoos. You don't really see them on natural history documentaries because they're hiding.
Yeah.
I mean, most of them are nocturnal. They hide in the bushes. But they're very important. They're very important components of the rainforest that they live in. Just like we talk about monkeys as seed dispersers and. They're structuring the system that they're part of. Duikers are doing that, and there's a lot of them. So these small species, although they don't go around in herds, but they have come in quite high densities. So they're dispersing seeds, they're eating fallen leaves, they're kind of structuring the forest, and they're also providing a really important prey base for a lot of the larger species.
Yeah.
So they're really important. I don't know if I'm not sure that is why I like them so much, but probably just because no one else really knows very much about them.
That's all right.
That's really cool.
Someone's got to advocate for the little
We'll find a
ones.
niche, can't you?
Cool. And so then you came back and did your PhD whilst you were working here. Is that right?
Yes, it wasn't quite that simple, but basically I ended up doing the PhD part-time and working here as the overseas conservation officer. So there was, people left, and there was opportunities to do that, which worked really well. I mean, it meant the PhD was a marathon rather than a sprint. So normally PhD is 3 or 4 years, and I took 7, I think.
Okay.
but there was other people in our research team doing similar things at the time, so that was quite nice. So we had, although they weren't working on dikers, they were people doing zoo research mainly, and they were also doing their PhDs part-time, so we had a nice little community of people who were really stressed.
Trying to do two things at once.
Yeah.
Cool. So part of your role, you actually get to go overseas. Obviously not recent years with COVID, but you do get to go overseas quite a lot. Go on, give us some of the amazing places in the world you've been.
Yeah, I mean, it is very privileged. I used to go 2 or 3 times a year to visit one of our international conservation projects. Obviously, like you say, hasn't been as haven't been at all since the first COVID lockdown. Although I am going to Nigeria next week, so that'll be the first time that we go back out. But yeah, I mean the places that I've been most often are Tanzania, which was where I did my PhD, but where our one of our long-term field projects has developed. Nigeria, which I just mentioned, which is another long-term conservation project supported from Paignton Zoo. Zimbabwe, we still support, although I wasn't personally visiting that project over most, in recent times. Maybe I'll get to go back there, which would be nice because it's been nearly 20 years, so it'll be quite interesting.
Yeah.
And we've also had projects in Sulawesi in Indonesia, which is an amazing place, fantastic place to visit, and also in Vietnam. So, I mean, the places I've been most often actually are Tanzania and Nigeria, but those are the projects I've visited once or twice as well.
Nice.
Fantastic. So when you actually go out to these projects, what kind of things are you doing when you're over there?
Yeah, well, it's a mixture between the really kind of privileged, exciting, sexy stuff that people probably imagine, but that tends to be the minority of the time, really, because it is important to see the places that you want to work in, and if, like me, you're interested in dikers and little tiny brown frogs, that is part of the excitement. But often the kind of really important things is stuff like that's much more boring, like meetings and training people. And some of that stuff you can do online, and that's what we've found since lockdown, is that you can have some of these meetings online. Yeah. But it's not quite the same, and I think I am looking forward to going out to Nigeria next week, because I think there are some meetings you just wouldn't schedule, and it's only when you're trekking through the forest that you kind of have these ideas or get the opportunity to talk to people in a one-to-one kind of situation where you do make progress that way. So I think the future is we'll travel less, but we'll still need to sometimes to travel, and we could also bring people over here as well. So that would be great to allow. We've done a bit of in the past as well, but if we can have some of our overseas partners come and visit us at Paignton, Newquay, I think that would also be a great opportunity.
That would be really nice.
Cool. Right, I'm going to make you pick your favourite child now. Which is your favourite project, and why? So
difficult. This on a purely personal level. Yeah, I'm going to go for Tanzania
because of the dikers.
Yeah, well, because of the dikers. That's why I went to Tanzania. Yeah. So in my PhD, I went to visit lots of the remaining forests in the Udzungwa Mountains. Mm-hmm. These are part of the Eastern Arc Mountains. They're really exceptional biodiversity. Sometimes kind of nicknamed the Galapagos of Africa because they've got lots of kind of unique species that have evolved in isolation from each other on these mountain tops. Yeah. Cool. And one of the places I went looking for diker droppings, because of course it's hard to see them, so you either set cameras or you pick up their poo and glean what information you can from that. that was the PhD. It was a genetics one, so I was extracting DNA from diker poo and seeing what we could tell from that. But one of the places is that I only went there for a week or so, but it's a reserve called the Ozungwa Scarp in the southern Ozungwa. The Ozungwa Mountains are not really that big, but because of the topography and the state of the roads, it's really hard to travel around it. And the Ozungwa Scarp, the only thing, apart from going there to look for duikers, the only other thing we knew was that some other researchers had been and found species of amphibians, frogs and toads, that were not found anywhere else in the world. And not only that, they'd only been found in single sites within this forest, so like one little valley or one swamp. So that was an inspiration to take on a second kind of interest in the Ozungwas, which was the amphibian work. And that in turn, so kind of the research led to action. So we wanted to help protect that forest. Now it was a forest reserve already, so so it had a kind of some kind of status under the government, but it didn't have any active protection, didn't have any rangers or even kind of local forest guards based, in a shed on the edge of the border. There was nothing there. The people responsible were miles and miles away in the nearest kind of major towns. And that changed in around 2016, 2017, where the reserve was upgraded to a nature reserve status, and that gave it its own small Tanzanian staff to run it, government staff. And that gave us a partner to work with. So also working with other people in Tanzania, primarily the 7th Tanzanian Elephant Programme. We went and met with these guys, and we said, look, we've been doing research there. Our Tanzanian colleagues, are visiting this forest, and it's not looking good. All the trends for the wildlife that we're able to monitor are going in the wrong direction. We often find snares. We often see evidence for illegal logging, and they said, well, that's not allowed in a nature reserve, but we don't have the staff. Even now it's a nature reserve, with 4 or 5 staff. So we started funding the ranger patrols, and also importantly training of government staff to use modern equipment like GPS units and tracking devices, even smartphones actually nowadays, so that they can record their patrols, so they can go out there, walk up and down the mountain, camp overnight. They can remove snares, and if they encounter people indulged in illegal activities, then they can arrest them. So that's been as well as it being in Tanzania, which is obviously something close to my heart. It's a project where we've moved from in a kind of logical way from the research side, gaining more information, to protection on the ground.
Brilliant.
Cool. So that's kind of a natural evolution of that project.
Yeah, and I think the next step is to work more closely with the communities there as well, which I think is a really important thing. It's something that we do in other projects, but it's a kind of logical next step, really. Yeah. So what's there, what do we need to do about it in the short term, and what are the ultimate solutions long term, exactly, which is to work with the local people. Some of those people are part of the patrols. So in a very small way, they benefit from the project, but we haven't kind of fully engaged with the kind of community participation in the project just yet.
Yeah. So in terms of how it works, the partnerships that we have, does it vary from project to project what we actually do and how we are involved in it? I'm assuming there's some that we've set up ourselves, and then there's others that we've just joined in with. How does that sort of thing work?
Yeah, no, they all have quite kind of diverse origins. Like you said, some actually we set up ourselves. We started projects in other countries, and which have evolved into their own partner into fully fledged conservation organisations themselves, which has been the case in Vietnam and Sulawesi, a little bit in Zimbabwe. We didn't actually start that programme, but we were very, very early involved, working with another zoo in the UK. Others, it's more of a partnership between, a locally based organisation the Nigerian Conservation Foundation and us, and the project on the ground is a kind of a joint effort. But what we try to do is there's a number of factors, but one of the things we try to do is work in projects where we do have a voice. So we're not simply donors; we're involved with the direction of the project. So obviously, that's if we've set it up and it's in its early days, then that'll be actually quite time intensive from our end. And we probably will kind of move away a little bit from day to day running as the project team grows. But we want to be involved. You don't want to just give someone else money and say, right, you go and do that work. But that's a balance with the capacity building and empowering the people on the ground to make those decisions. So we want to be involved in setting the direction of the projects, but we don't want to be necessarily involved in what happens day to day. And that does change between projects.
Not direct hand holding, but at the same time, being that presence.
So and achieving aiming for a partnership approach, essentially, but a meaningful partnership, not just a donor-recipient one.
So are there people working for these projects that are employed by the Wild Planet Trust, or are they employed by the country that they're in?
So they're always employed by our partner organisation within the country, and that's another reason for our approach, really, is that, we're not really a big enough organisation as the Wild Planet Trust to have offices in, other countries. I mean, some conservation organisations obviously do that, but that would be a huge undertaking for us and very complicated legally. So that's another reason why we work in partnership, and all the people working on the projects are employed by those partners. We have had in the past a mixture of kind of researchers and people working directly for the partners. So sometimes we've had researchers from the UK or other countries who, are part of the project, and they're there, but they're not employed. They're there to do their research. But at the moment, I think all of our project staff are, from the range countries that the projects operate in.
Cool.
Nice.
Okay, so moving away slightly then, back to your actual job role. What skills do you think you need for your job that you wouldn't necessarily directly associate with it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what people would directly associate with,
no,
with
it's a
my
tricky
job.
one.
But generally speaking, I think what's happened in the world of conservation is that it's gone from a pretty narrow focus on the biology, on the natural science side of things. So it's still, pretty common that lots of people working in conservation will have, some kind of postgraduate degree in ecology or zoology. And that's one way into it. That's my own route. But I think a lot of the skills that you actually need in this kind of role, they're not things that you learn doing a master's degree or a PhD necessarily. So, it's a lot of project management skills, which you may well gain from other walks of life. And there are quite a number of people in conservation who've kind of made a big, change in their career path. And they were doing something completely different, but they've been successful when they've kind of turned their hand to working in conservation.
I'm guessing you need pretty good people skills.
Yeah, I think so. So I think you definitely need good communication skills, be able to work with people, be tolerant of your working conditions. This is more, on the field side of things. The other aspect, which is not a skill set that I have, but which we are increasingly recognising as important, is the social science aspect. So people who are actually trained in psychology or sociology, human geography.
Yeah.
I think that that's another role within conservation that's growing a lot at the moment, and something that we've also done within the Wild Planet Trust. As you know, we've funded and supervised PhD research on the social science side of things as well.
Yeah, because we spoke to Harry early on in the podcast series, and obviously he's social sciences and was directly involved with Selamat Kanyaki over in Indonesia, wasn't he? So
the project in Sulawesi.
Yeah. So would you say, I mean, Selamat Kanyaki is probably quite a good example of quite a community focused project. Would you say that's the direction that conservation seems to be going in more and more now?
Yeah, I think so. It's a funny one. I think there's been for a very long time that's been recognised, but I think there's a kind of difference between it being recognised and talked about and actually happening.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's definitely the right direction to go in. So I think, in a very black and white sense, people talk about fortress conservation. So that means putting a fence round. Putting a fence round habitats and wildlife, keeping people out. And saving species that way, and then kind of more community participation as at the kind of other end, and I think that's much too kind of simplistic. But the kind of weight of the argument is kind of coming down on the community side, because circumstances change, and those fences, if people don't want fences separating them from the areas where they live, then at some point, it's not going to work. So I think, definitely community engagement really important, and something that we've done very well in Sulawesi. The team of Selamat Kanyaki have been really good at that generally, but particularly in an area called Tankoko, which has been a bit of a focus, and where we know there's a kind of core population of the Sulawesi crested black macaques.
Cool. Okay. So I reckon it's probably about wrapping up time there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we could keep talking, but we do have Tracey to talk to as well.
We are going to talk to Tracey next, who is obviously one of your colleagues who does more of the UK side of things. But obviously, with our discussion here today, Andy, we've barely scratched the surface.
Oh, I know.
So there is obviously a lot more that you do and a lot more that we could talk about, but unfortunately you are rather busy, and we're fitting this in between meetings.
Sadly. So.
And before you go away to Nigeria. So thank you very much for coming on. I've got one last question for you, and obviously it's to do with your job role today. What would your advice be to your 15-year-old self to get to where you are now?
Yes, it's an interesting one, because actually, I've always wanted to work with wildlife. Always wanted, from a very early age. I wanted to, as soon as I kind of understood conservation as a thing, from largely actually through zoos and through books like those written by Gerald Durrell. Yeah, that's been my kind of dream. I've been very, very lucky to work in an area that I always wanted to. But when I was 15, I had a big wobble, because I was terrified I was going to fail my science. Was things like a double science GCSE. Yeah. I think it was at the time, but chemistry, physics, biology, because I was pretty rubbish at physics and chemistry. I was okay at biology, but I thought that was going to drag me down. And I wouldn't be able to then get into university to do zoology or ecology or one of the kind of relevant things. Going back to this idea that, in those days, certainly, if you wanted to work in conservation, that's what you needed.
That's what you did.
So certificates.
So I would need to speak directly to my 15-year-old self and say, have faith, keep going, keep revising, because you'll scrape the grades and and you'll make it. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think, to keep going and to be confident in your abilities and your ability to come at situations in a different way if what you're doing isn't working. There's usually more than one way to skin the proverbial cat. So I would say, keep going.
Okay, so perseverance.
Perseverance. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Andy, for coming onto the podcast. Obviously, you're off to meetings now, so we
Before
won't
you
keep
jet
you
off to
any
Nigeria.
Yeah, it's been a busy week.
I can imagine. Right, yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and
you.
of course, hopefully, we'll talk to you again at some point in future projects.
Yep, it'd be a pleasure. Thanks very much.
This podcast is brought to you by Wild Planet Trust, a conservation charity based in the southwest of the UK with zoos in Paignton and Newquay, local and national nature reserves, and field projects in the UK, Tanzania, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Vietnam, and Sulawesi. You can find out more on our website www.wildplanettrust.org.uk. Rightio, so that was our discussion with Andy, obviously very busy person. In fact, at the time of recording this, it's before he's gone away. And by the time that you're hearing this, he's probably already in Nigeria.
Yeah.
May still be over there. But who are we talking to next, Jo?
So next up we've got Tracey. So she's equally knowledgeable about all things conservation. But I think it's easy to assume, because we care for exotic animals, that all of our conservation work must involve exotic animals, but actually it doesn't. We do a huge amount in the UK. So Tracey's the person that heads up a lot of our UK projects and works with our project partners, mostly in the local area, in the Devon area, and including down at our site down in Slapton-Lee as well. So she's going to be our next person that we're chatting to.
Excellent. Let's hear from our discussion with Tracey. We are now joined by Tracey. Obviously, your name is Tracey, but Tracey, who are you and what do you do at Wild Planet Trust?
So, I'm Tracey and I'm a conservation officer here and I manage our programmes within the UK. So that includes research as well.
Okie dokie. And the follow-up question to that, obviously we'll get into all the different projects and things like that as we go through the rest of our kind of questions we've got for you. But my follow-up question is, what is the strangest job you've ever done?
What, in my life?
Yeah.
In your entire career.
I've had quite a lot of weird jobs, actually.
Is there any highlight?
Yeah. When I was quite a lot younger and I was saving up to do a little bit of travelling, we were kind of doing all sorts of weird jobs.
Okay.
One of the strangest ones that I ever did was painting a swimming pool, which in itself doesn't sound that weird, but it was used as a sprinkler system for this factory. So they drained it, cleaned it, and then they gave me emulsion paint, which is quite interesting. Water-based paint to paint the swimming pool.
Okay.
Then they had to fill it before I'd finished, so then we finished it in a canoe, which is just the most bizarre thing. I got paid, so that was fine, but it was a bit odd. And probably working on banana farms, that was quite interesting as well, which I've done quite a bit of in Australia.
I was about to say, where in the world? In Australia. What, picking bananas? Or?
Yeah, doing all sorts actually. I used to mostly drive the tractors and go and do various management things around the bananas.
Oh, I've always wondered this about bananas, and you could probably answer it. Do they harvest like the entire massive? It's got a name, hasn't it? The whole thing.
Yeah, so they cut it at the top, and if especially if you're on an organic farm, that will likely be full of big spiders and snakes and things as well.
Oh, lovely!
So that was a bit of an occurrence because the guys would get them on their shoulders, hold the bottom, and then the top would be cut, and then you quite often find this terrified, probably snake kind of zooming out of the bottom. But
that doesn't sound fun.
It's one of those places where every
everything's
bit of wildlife
kill
is
you.
out to kill you. So
safest on the tractor then.
Not
with snakes and killer spiders climbing.
A tarantula under the seat or something. That'll do it.
Oh, okay. Anyway, on that note, I was like,
it's pretty cool.
Crawling now, thinking of spiders and snakes all over me. I like them as animals, but to observe, not to touch.
Fair enough.
Okay, so we always start with a bit about how you got to where you are today, and I know it's quite a long one for you with lots of various roles.
Yeah, although it's kind of come around in a circle really, because my original interest was always conservation and ecology. And I don't think I really realised that until I went to university the first time round many years ago when I left school. And that's sort of when I really got into the sort of science, I guess, of ecology, and I found that just fascinating. So I did, quite a number of jobs around sort of water pollution. I worked for the National River Authority, as it was at the time, for a couple of different jobs in ecotoxicology and monitoring river systems and things. I've always been a really keen gardener, actually. It's something that's been throughout my whole life, really. And somehow managed, I think it was when I had a small child, basically, and was looking for little jobs that would fit round. So I ended up teaching horticulture for quite a few years, actually. And I was really keen on the whole kind of wildlife gardening and ecology in your garden, and how to kind of do really simple things to kind of make that space for nature in your own home. So that's another big passion of mine, is kind of that kind of small actions that can really make a difference, which is something that I still try and bring to my role here at Wild Planet Trust as well, because I think it's a key thing. And I've done a bit of consultancy as well, so ecological consultancy. But I think what got me through to this job is actually I went back to university and did a master's, really looking at getting good skills on how to identify things, how to conduct proper research and collect data in a meaningful way, how you kind of plan and design surveys and things. And I think that was fundamental, actually. And I was doing consultancy work at the same time, so it all kind of merged in. And I think that was really, really useful. It's a skill that I think many people that leave uni, maybe with their first degree, they don't always have many field skills, and they're quite difficult to acquire. You have to kind of just go out there and have a go at it a lot of times. So it was a very practical course, and I just thought it was a brilliant course, actually, I have to say. So that's kind of, that refocused me, I think, back into kind of the world that I really wanted to be in, which was kind of getting out there and looking at the ecology of life, and looking at kind of what we can do around our habitats as well. So
cool. And then I'm right in thinking you're the same as Andy in that you did your PhD part-time.
I did. So when I started working here, I was actually still doing my master's. So I did a project that actually led into my PhD, which was quite convenient, and then did a part-time PhD sort of for the first 7 years of working here, which is quite hard work doing that. And that gave me quite a lot more skills, I guess, around managing research, I think, and a lot of other sort of transferable skills. So I'm now a doctor, and hopefully, a lot of that kind of expertise that you learn through doing a PhD kind of now comes into play with my current role.
Cool. Okay, so on to your current role then. So, I mean, conservation officer is quite a broad title. What does that actually mean? What are you doing day to day?
It's quite a broad remit, actually. I think working here at the zoo is quite interesting because I'll meet people that have a real passion for primates. That's my thing. I love that.
Look at one right now.
Someone else, they're really into their invertebrates or their reptiles. But doing what I do, it basically covers everything.
Yeah.
And you're obviously not an expert in everything by any sort of stretch, but people do tend to ask you a lot of very detailed questions about, I don't know, bee behaviour or something quite bizarre as that. So I've always been somebody that's actually quite interested in a lot of things. I'm quite a generalist, I think, in my which is good in my kind of interest. I mean, my background is possibly more botanical, but that's kind of in part because of the choices I made, in terms of modules that I selected when I was doing my master's, because actually underpinning everything pretty much, we get back to habitat, which is made up of plants. So actually, if you have a kind of understanding of that sort of thing, then a lot of other stuff builds on that. Yeah. So Yeah, so what do I do? So we have a number of programmes, which obviously you guys are hopefully aware of. And managing those spans a whole range of things, from me going out on a boat to oversee some volunteer divers, jumping in the sea and counting seagrass, to working out budgets, to doing all the health and safety and risk assessments. So it's a lot of paperwork.
Yep.
You know, we spend a lot of grants, so there's a lot of grant funding to deal with and reporting back to funders. So that bit of it probably doesn't sound quite so exciting, but it's all part of what you do.
Yeah.
And obviously, the other part of what we do is we have placement students and we have master's students as well. So it's focusing their projects around our conservation project. So where do we need questions answered, and you know, where can we kind of inform management, for example, on our reserves? Are we doing the right thing? Are we seeing the benefits that we want to see through the management we're doing? And being able to, you know, do a few pertinent surveys here and there can help us kind of help us find out the answers to those questions. So that's my favourite bit of my job, actually, is kind of is the sort of research side, I think.
Okay.
Actually,
Much easier for you to obviously get out and visit the partnerships here rather than Andy having to arrange a flight, etc.
I know, and I always think people probably think, oh, you know, you don't get to go to Sulawesi and Nigeria, and whilst I would quite like to, actually, I'm not sure I'd want to go there for work. I think I'd rather go there and just really enjoy them and have a look at lots of the cool stuff. I suspect that Andy has to sit in an office and do things like interviewing people in the heat of Nigeria. So I'm quite I quite enjoy the fact that, in fact, in about 15 minutes, I'm going to go down to Slapton and do some surveys down there. So it's accessible, and it means I have a much closer working relationship, perhaps, with some of our partners that are in the UK. You know, they're often at the end of a telephone, or we can meet in person. And I think that, I'm sure that's easier.
Yes,
I can imagine it would be. Yeah,
we don't tend to have language differences and things as well. So
So you do still get out and about quite
I do
often,
a bit.
then?
Yes, I try and go to Slapton whenever possible, which is not that often, but because I live it down there. I've got long links with Slapton. I used to volunteer there back when I was still a student at my first degree, so I've always loved it, and it's great having that as part of my job now.
Yeah.
And probably one of the key things that made me apply for the job in the first place, maybe.
Just so listeners are aware as well, obviously Slapton Lee is a trust-owned site.
Yeah.
So we look after... Well, Tracey, why don't you explain what Slapton Lee is? Because I can give the overview, but obviously you're involved.
Yeah,
so.
I thought you were going to ask me how big it was. I'm never very good on hectareages of various bits of land that we own.
There are maps that we can find that on, but that's that. Just what is Slapton Lee?
It's a national nature reserve, so it has that kind of designation. It's also SSSI, so a site of special scientific interest. And the reasons for that are many. So it has some quite important assemblages of breeding birds. Some of the habitats down there are quite unusual and particularly important. So the one I'm going to look at later on today is the Shingle Ridge. Yeah. So if you want to go and have a look at a map, you would see that Slapton is largely made up of a big freshwater lagoon that's separated from the sea by a long shingle bar, which we have a few of those kind of geological features around the country. But it does give quite a unique set of habitats that we have there. And I suppose compared to a number of other nature reserves, maybe that people might be more familiar with, Slapton has a really big diversity of habitats. So we have the freshwater habitat, we have reed beds, we have willow carr, so wet woodland, we have grasslands, wet, dry grasslands, we've got other woodland, ancient woodland, we've got secondary woodland, we've got the shingle ridges, you know, name it and we've probably got it down there. So that's interesting. It's interesting from a management point of view, so there's lots of different targets and things to kind of consider. It's really interesting from the species point of view, because we've got so many different habitats, and we have certain species that will be found in certain places. So, for example, we have sail buntings down there, so we find them predominantly in the scrub and in the hedgerows. We do quite a lot of dormouse monitoring down there, so we find them across the reserve actually, though we're trying to do a bit more research to unpick that a bit more and look at connectivity throughout the reserve. It's very interesting. A lot of it's not publicly accessible. Some of it is. There's a really lovely nature trail that goes around the lay, which anyone can go and walk. And you get some great lookout points across the water and into the reed beds, which is fab. We manage it in partnership with the Field Studies Council, so they actually have feet on the ground and are doing the active management, if you like, but we have a committee, so we all kind of pitch in terms of what needs to happen on the reserve. And obviously the Field Centre runs a lot of their field courses within the reserve, so there's lots of sites that they use quite regularly for running field courses. So interesting, quite complicated, very beautiful.
It is a lovely place.
Definitely worth a visit.
I mean, from my perspective, obviously wildlife photography and videography and stuff, it's fantastic because, as you said, so many habitats and so many species.
Cool. So setting up partnerships in the UK, I assume it works along the same lines as the overseas. So no one's employed directly by the Wild Planet Trust in relation to our conservation projects, or does it work slightly different?
So we've got sort of a range of different arrangements. So if we look at so we have partnerships. So, for example, one of our plant reintroduction projects, we do that in partnership with the National Trust because they own the site where the plants are being reintroduced to. So it can be quite straightforward with that kind of thing. We contract people with particular skills. So, for example, for our crayfish project, we really need experts in their fields for that. So we actually contract specific people to conduct surveys. I mean, they need to be licensed because it's a protected species. So we start getting into the murky world of needing all of those things covered. But we also look for support for our projects from other key stakeholders. So, for example, it would be the Environment Agency would be a key component, perhaps with that for our crayfish, because we're looking at rivers and freshwater habitats. So we kind of pull on expertise where we need to, and it's really important that we kind of have a pool of people that kind of contribute to make a successful project. And we work with other zoos as well. So again, with the crayfish project, we work with Bristol Zoo a fair bit with that. So it's quite variable. At the moment, we have a lot of grant funding for a lot of these projects, and they can sometimes be used to employ people. So currently we have somebody working on our seagrass project, and she's funded through our grants and sponsorships as well. So we just have to find what fits best really for what we want to do and what skills we need. So for the seagrass, we really need someone who's got some marine biology background, but was also very good with all our volunteers, and can manage that side of things and be quite well organised with all the kit and so forth. So so it's very variable, and each project's a little bit different as to how it actually works on the ground.
So are most of these projects ones that already existed that we've then joined in on, or are they ones we've set up ourselves?
Often they kind of do tend to grow organically, and we've kept them because they fit with our kind of strategy, and they're important to us locally. So, for example, the marine stuff that we're doing here, which focuses largely around seagrass within Torbay, is literally a few yards off our coast here. It's local to us. It's very relevant for us as a site, so it makes absolute sense for us to be involved with that. Things like the Stratwort, so the little plant reintroduction, the only UK site was at Slapton, so we kind of had a responsibility from the beginning to do something about that. So they kind of can grow organically. We got involved with crayfish since I've been here. We've done various different iterations of that project. with a key focus on setting up safe arc sites really for those populations. Ideally, you don't want to be doing a project forever. It'd be great. You think, right, well, we've kind of finished that one.
Yeah.
They don't always work like that. And things change as you go forward. So you have to adapt and look at what the best route forward for that project is, whether that's for us to continue with it or for someone else to take it forward, depending on what their skill set and what they can offer to that. So it's a bit of a roundabout way of trying to explain that, wasn't it?
It's quite different with UK. I mean, we always talk about reintroduction in a zoo setting and say that it's the animals you see here are not going to be reintroduced. But having said that, we are actively involved in reintroduction in a UK sense, aren't we? So
actually, I mean, and it would be good to find the numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's more native reintroduction projects, because I think there's obviously an awareness that it's really important that we start on our doorstep. That's really important. We live in the country where we're working with these animals, which does overcome some hurdles. I mean, by no means it's always easier at all. But I think that it can be quite different, and we have the climate as well to breed some of these things, and some things like invertebrates and some amphibians and things, potentially make really good reintroduction subjects. So it's a different kind of focus, I suppose. Yeah. But in some ways it can be easier, but that's a big, broad generalisation. I'm a bit worried about even saying that because, it's...
No, but for example, with the hazel dormouse, obviously we can have them on site in quarantine and things like that, and we can actually send them out to... We work with partners on that one?
So there's a whole range of partners with dormice.
And then they can go and reintroduce them, and it's easier than, say, reintroducing a rhino in Africa, because then there's all the logistics involved.
I would imagine reintroducing a dormouse is probably easier than a rhino, full stop. But indeed, there's sort of potentially less logistics, although we have quite a lot of legislation around protected species in this country, so there are quite a lot of hoops we still have to jump through.
Soil buntings, we were involved in the reintroduction for those as well, weren't we?
So that's going back quite a few years now. So that was, again, using the skills that we have on site for hand rearing chicks to a point when they can go into soft release. So it's really capitalising on the kind of skill set that members of our bird department had to be able to really make that project work. And that was actually a really good project. I mean, the whole soil bunting story is one-off success. And part of it was that project to get them back into Cornwall, and that worked really well. So we now have soil buntings in Cornwall. They're a little bird that doesn't like to travel too far, shall we say. So trying to wait for them to naturally recolonise areas was always going to be quite difficult and not really an option for that kind of distance. But also that was always coupled with a lot of work with landowners and habitat, including what we've done at Slapton as well, to kind of boost numbers in Devon, which was kind of their stronghold, where they'd been reduced back to, if you like. So it was a real nice project that incorporated kind of different skill sets from different people. And that's what I mean about trying to find what that best match is. And it's a bit like with the dormice as well. Our vet team, do the health checks and quarantining before they get to be released, so make sure that they're healthy and things. So again, looking at that skill set and where it can be most useful, and that's part of what we look at when we're looking at projects. We think, well, what can we bring to the table that we're really good at, that maybe other people can't cover quite so well. So it's quite interesting.
Cool. What is your proudest moment in your role at Wild Planet Trust?
Do you know what? It's probably always going to be the classic reintroduction bits, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like when you just, that little crayfish scampers out from your hand, if there's crayfish scampers, and then tootles off into his arc site, and you kind of hope that they're going to go on and make baby crayfish and things. That's always the little feel-good thing. But actually, I actually really like, some of the little things that I really like doing are walking through some of our meadow areas in the summer, actually. And I don't do it enough because it is really, really lovely. So our reserves here around the zoo managed by our reserves warden, and one of them is an area of grassland that was probably pretty uninteresting 20 years ago. And through the management that's been put in place over that time and various interventions, you walk through there in the summer now and there's an increasing number of orchids year on year. It's full of bees, butterflies and all sorts of flowers, and it's just gorgeous. And we've got similarly a piece of limestone grassland, and that is my favourite spot in the whole zoo. You can stand up there, you can see the sea, you can see a bit of woodland, and not a lot else. And again, in the summer, it's full of life up there. It's great. So
That's really good.
I like, those are my favourite spots.
Very nice.
I know exactly where you mean, and it is beautiful.
It is.
I enjoy going
It
up
is.
there myself. Okay, so what kind of skills do you think you need for your job that you don't necessarily associate with your job? So obviously, ecology skills is an obvious one, but
Yeah.
what else?
Yeah. Don't know. I'm wondering if I've got them. You need to be quite organised. I'm not sure how organised I am. You've got to be quite flexible. But also, I think I'm quite dogged with things. I like to actually see things through. This, I'm going to make this work. This is, you know, we'll find a way to make this happen and this work. I think you've got to sort of have quite a passion for it, which probably most people that work in conservation do it because they have a passion for it. So I don't think that's probably a rare skill. I don't know. I think that the research bit is one of the bits that I've mentioned that I do really like, and that doesn't often go along with conservation roles, actually. So it's sort of a bit of an unusual job in that way, which is what I think makes it really interesting, actually, is that coupling of kind of practical, some of it hands-on stuff, some of it kind of more about planning and project management. That's probably one of the main skills, actually, is having some sort of project management skills, really being able to keep your eye on all those lovely bits of paperwork.
When you've got so many projects on the go at once.
Yes. I definitely need another whiteboard in the office.
So neither of you have mentioned it, but I think you and Andy are both very laid back. I don't know whether being laid back makes...
I'll tell you what you do need to be working in conservation is you need to be an optimist.
Maybe that's what it is, because both of you are very much like, it's fine, not a problem, it's great.
I suppose it comes from that kind of determination to see things through, and the fact that you kind of have a handle on stuff, and if not, you'll find a way to get it done anyway.
Yeah, and you have to be quite flexible as well, I think.
I don't think I've ever seen either of you like, stressed. Apparently I would be rubbish because I'm a very stressy person.
At least not in front of us.
That's true, yes.
No, I can do that behind closed doors. No, maybe that's, just our natures.
That
don't
flexibility.
Know. But I think being optimistic and having a real feeling that what you're trying to do is going to work. You have to believe that. Even in the face of kind of mounting adversity. Which is the world that we live in at the moment. So I must admit I know that lots of bad things happen, and I try not to focus on that too much, and I'm quite a big advocate at looking at solutions. I think I'm more solution focused. I find that it takes the wind out of my sails if I focus too much on the negative side of things, because we know that that's bad. So what are we going to do about it? How are we going to try and find some way through, I think.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to do one more from me, Ollie, and then I'll save it. Okay, because it's always interesting to hear from people who are doing the job now. Where do you see jobs in conservation going in the future? Because yours is a very traditional kind of route to
Well, I
things.
think in the last few years there's been a really important growing role for social scientists, because basically conservation actually is about people. And if you, I suppose, a bit cynically look at what people working in conservation are doing, they're undoing what someone else has done. Generally,
never thought
and
about it.
trying to undo damage that's happened, from somebody else. So I think the human element of it, and I think traditional people that work in conservation, it's maybe not their first kind of reason for doing things. It's the people aspect. I know so many people that are just really happy being in the woods doing their thing, and they don't necessarily want to have to deal with
talk to people.
Yeah, but I think understanding people and people's motivations and trying to look at how you might change people's behaviour, it's really important. And even a big conference that I went to towards the end of my PhD, which is 5 years ago, had a huge array of subject matters, but very, very little on social science. I was quite surprised, actually, and I think that, you know, in sort of the years since then, it's become a bigger thing, and really importantly, so a lot more people with sort of, you know, human geography or other sort of backgrounds really moving into that world. And I think there's still room for some of that more traditional stuff, but it's looking at the whole array of types of skill sets that you actually need. So that's one of the big things that I think will change moving forward, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, gives a wider remit for coming into it, though, doesn't it? Then if you come
it
from
does,
that mixture of backgrounds.
And I think a lot of you look at a lot of the skills that are asked for now. A lot of it's around communication. Even if it's not, you know, social science type stuff, a lot of it's around communicating stuff to people, which again is really important, and again is something that maybe 20 or 30 years ago, say, would not necessarily have been high on the list of your average reserve warden. I mean, even when I started, the types of roles that there were, either you worked on a nature reserve or you went and worked for, you know, one of the national bodies doing something. There wasn't really a lot else going on, to be honest. So I think it's changed a lot and will carry on changing. So
fair enough.
We'll wait and see.
Okay, well, that brings me on to kind of our final question. Obviously, again, like with Andy, there's so much more that we could talk about. We could get into specific projects, but for now, obviously, we've only had you for the amount of time that we do. So my last question for you, Tracey, is what would your advice be to your 15-year-old self to get to where you are now?
Do you know what I quite often wish that I had done? I'm a bit academic, I'm afraid.
I've read your papers, I know.
And I think in some ways it's a shame that there's such a big focus on that academic pathway to get into various careers, because I think there's a whole raft of practical and experience-based skills that will actually be really useful. But I kind of wish I did my master's much earlier. And it was something that I thought about doing, and I decided to do something else. And I kind of think, actually, I think I should have stayed on the path. And maybe I wouldn't have kind of deviated and wandered all around these other various jobs that I've done. So I wouldn't have done. That wasn't 15, though. When I was 15, gosh, what do I want to do then? I wanted to be a vet.
As did anybody.
we all. How could you work with animals if you were a bit sciencey, really?
Be a vet.
That was the only option, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So, I think maybe paying attention to the one ecology lesson I did at school, I think I might have missed somehow. It was a subject I didn't even know existed till I went to university. So, so it's quite difficult looking back. I think perhaps having a bit more confidence in myself to actually follow the things that I was really passionate about, I think. So I think that might have been slightly different.
Okie dokie.
But you never know. could be a combination of all those other things that you do that end up.
That means you get where
Yep.
you are.
Where you
I
are
always
now.
think that. Yeah.
No, that is a fair way to answer that question because, well, obviously, it's quite hard to give your 15-year-old self advice. It's completely hypothetical.
I don't think I'd want to
And
meet
we're all
my
here anyway.
15-year-old self.
No, fair enough. Well, thank you very much, Tracey, for coming onto the
Okay, thank
podcast.
you.
Obviously, we're going to let you go and you're going to go on holiday now, aren't you?
Yeah, a bit of survey down at Slapton.
Bit of survey first,
Bit of
and
survey,
then you're off for a few
and then
days.
I'm going to Scotland. Yes.
Very nice, very nice.
Survey.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast and giving us your time. And obviously, we'll
No worries.
hopefully be speaking to you about specific projects sometime in the future.
Okay. Good day. All right then. Thanks very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much for listening or watching our podcast. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving us a review, or if you're watching, please hit the like button and leave us a comment about your favourite part of the episode. To get more content from Wild Planet Trust, please consider checking out our YouTube channel. You can subscribe there, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter on our website. Of course, you can find Wild Planet Trust, Paignton Zoo and Newquay Zoo on all main social media platforms, and we'd really appreciate you checking those out as well. All that's left to say is thank you very much for watching, and of course we'll see you in the next episode.